So welcome, Alice. Welcome. The story told today is of a metropolitan police force which is riddled with sexism, racism, homophobia, abusive behaviour. Is that the force that you served in?
It is, but it took me a while to see that. I think that when I was in the force, I was institutionalized, and I think a lot of women are. I think that lots of people start when they're very young. So I was, very early 20s. And when you look around you and you kind of look up to those people you respect, and everybody's laughing at a joke that you don't think is very funny and actually makes you feel quite uncomfortable, you think, well, I must be the one that's being sensitive. I must be oversensitive. I must be too serious. And I felt like that for a long time. And the more time that I've had away from policing, the more and more I look back and think, wow, that wasn't okay. It wasn't right. And I realised just how institutionalised I was.
Okay, so somehow it seemed to you normal in the policing environment. Now, looking back then, can you just give me some examples of the sort of behaviour that you saw around you that you now look back and see as unacceptable and wrong?
Yes, of course. So on my team, a lot of the male officers would talk about women's sex lives. So they would talk about their female colleagues. They would ask quite probing questions about people's sex lives. They would watch pornography quite openly. I was pornography was kind of thrust in my face on someone's mobile phone, and that happened a few times. They would share photos. They would openly talk about going and using prostitutes on stag do's in European cities, and then come back and talk about it like it was all a big joke. They would discuss rape victims
What do you mean
as
by, yeah, and what did they say when they were discussing rape victims?
Yeah, so they would I have heard things like 99% of rape complaints are a load of rubbish, that's regretful sex. It's people who maybe have cheated on their boyfriends and they want to get away with that by saying they were raped, but it's not real. You know, judging women, they're not upset enough, they're too upset, it doesn't make sense what they're saying, why have they waited so long to report it? Just very, very much focused on the victim rather than the alleged
So
perpetrator.
did you come across many cases of allegations of rape which were in this way simply not taken seriously? Did you see that on a number of occasions then?
I think that that has definitely happened. It was difficult for me to see it because I was on the initial response team. So I would maybe go out and take the report of the rape, and I would take the first statement, but I wouldn't then follow it through. So a lot of those cases didn't go to court. And I could tell that because obviously if they went to court, I would be called to court to give my initial evidence. And I hardly ever was.
Mm.
Very, very, maybe I could count on one hand the time that I went to court for a rape offence. And we know that lots of them aren't being convicted. We know that they're not going through to court.
Mm.
When you've got these attitudes amongst the officers, then how can you believe that they're putting their full effort into
Yeah.
investigating
And did
these
you
things?
come across cases, Alice, where a woman was complaining of being raped and you thought it was a serious allegation, a serious case, and turned out not to be treated seriously? Did you come across that?
I think that there are cases. Again, I wasn't directly involved in the investigations of rape themselves,
Yeah.
so it's very difficult for me to give like a first-hand witness account
Yeah.
of that.
But your
But I
impression was that was
know,
the attitude towards those
oh,
cases.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned pornography being looked at by officers. When you say that, were these occasional cases that came around every now and again? What is it? People looking at a mobile phone, porn on a telephone? Was this happening commonly? Was it happening all the time?
It certainly wasn't uncommon. It wasn't something that you would walk in and be shocked about because you'd seen it a few times.
Yes.
And the first time it happened to me, I was on a carrier. We were going into London to provide aid to central London, which is where they take officers off boroughs and they put them into a central event. I can't remember what that event was, but we were on a riot van, in a riot van essentially. I was the only female in there, and they were passing around a mobile phone with hardcore pornography on it, and it was put in my face. I was asked questions such as, would you do that? Do you like that? Do you watch porn?
Mm.
All of this kind of things, which made me feel very, very, very uncomfortable. But my only choice, and the only choice I felt like I had in that situation, was to laugh along. And I regret that now. I regret that I didn't call that out.
And did you come across cases which I understand you may have done of cases of revenge porn, officers showing around pictures of women they knew had relationships with?
Yes, I heard stories of these were other female police officers, and they had essentially given their boyfriend, trusted their boyfriend, also a police officer, with intimate photos. These intimate photos had been shared around the team, and these women's names were being shared around. Sometimes it was maybe 2 boroughs away from us, not even our own borough, but these women's names were kind of going around the force. And obviously now, revenge porn is a crime. At the time it wasn't, and it was they were basically the ones being judged, not the boyfriends who were sharing the images, but the women. How could you be so stupid to give someone those photos of you?
Okay, the report also talks about racism, about homophobia. Did you come across that, insignificant numbers of cases? And are we talking here about, I don't know, a limited number of so-called bad apples, or was this genuinely commonplace, just part of the working environment?
Yeah, I've heard from colleagues who have been racially abused by sergeants. One particular instance, they used the P word against a colleague, and 2 people spoke out against this sergeant, and one of them said to me that I wish I'd never spoken out about that, because it's followed me for my whole career. Everybody, before I go somewhere, if I go to a new unit, they know that I've spoken out about this. I'm seen as a troublemaker. Nothing happened, and the sergeant wasn't he wasn't penalised, or it wasn't investigated in any way. But there were at least 2 people that had heard him say it. I think that it certainly is a huge problem, and it always has been. I don't think that the Met has ever been an institution where women of colour, especially women, people from the LGBT community, have ever fully been allowed to flourish, have ever fully been accepted.
So the story told by the Casey report is, to you, nothing new.
No, not really, no. And I think, although it's awful, the things we're hearing, I am glad that they're coming out, and I'm glad that we're hearing them, because I think the only way we're going to be able to change these things, the only way the Met's going to be able to change these things, is to really scrape out the bottom of that barrel. And it is a rotten barrel, because you cannot, these men would not have been able to thrive in this environment if they weren't supported, if they weren't allowed to make these comments. And when you allow someone like Wayne Couzens to make those horrible comments about women, to talk about women that way, you're basically saying to him, yeah, you're right. You're right about women. And you're almost egging him on. And it's that culture, when paired with the fact that the police is such a powerful profession, it attracts bullies, it attracts people who abuse women, and it attracts people who want to be close to vulnerable people. So when you pair that culture with the fact that these dangerous men are attracted to policing, then this is what happens. You get David Carrick, you get Wayne Couzens.
If a woman came to you and said to you, if I'm in fear, if I'm being harassed, if I'm being threatened in some way, should I go to the police? Can I trust the police? What do you say to that woman, that friend?
I would say yes. I would like, I have had harassment since I've started talking out about feminism and about misogyny. I've had it, and I have spoken to the police about it, because I've had some online things that have, encroached on my life, and they have dealt with it well. And I think that I think it's very important to realise that there are a lot of officers in the police who are trying to do a good job, who are good people. The majority of them are good people, and they're fighting against a culture that it prevents them from doing the right thing. Doing the right thing is kind of almost frowned upon. Calling out bad behaviour is definitely frowned upon. So I think I would tell them. Obviously, I would never pressure anyone into doing that. It's your own choice, but I do think the police can be trusted. However, I think, especially with harassment and sexual assault cases, massive improvements need to be made.
I mean, can this be fixed, Alice?
I honestly don't know. Lots of people have been obviously asking that question, and I think it's going to take a monumental restructuring. I think it's going to take, and it is going to take a long time as well. But I think we need, I already think that Commissioner Rowley has made a mistake already by not accepting that they are institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic. How can he not accept that when what he's seen from this report, already he's denying it. And one of those things that Baroness Casey raised was this us and them attitude, this we know best attitude. And he's already doing it. He's already showing us that by saying, actually, no, we're not institutionally anything.
If he had accepted the police were institutionally racist and misogynist and homophobic, what would have been the consequence of that? Would he have lost the trust of his officers, or would a lot of them actually have thought more of him, owed him, and given him more respect?
It's hard to judge that because all we can go on really is by the officers who come along and kind of all I can go on is the officers who come along and they use social media, and most of those officers are venting. Most of those officers are, not all police, not all men, those kind of, and I think that if he'd have said that, then yes, they would have seen it as a betrayal, 100%. But I do think there are officers there who are thinking, yes, we need to admit this, we need to change things, we need to listen. And they're looking around them and they're probably thinking there are lots of people here who shouldn't be in this job. And they're ruining it for me, and they're ruining it for Londoners. Essentially what it boils down to is the Met have not protected women on the streets of London. Instead of protecting them and making the streets safer, they've given men, dangerous men, warrant cards and guns, and they've sent them out on the streets.
Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.